Hey, I'm Shay Warner, and you are listening to Casual Cattle Conversations. If you are ready to explore different management practices and focus on improving your operation and the beef industry, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited you are listening. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to another episode, and I am very excited to share this story with you. Cheramie is an amazing person who is having a big impact on youth. And while it may seem on the surface level that she's having an impact on youth in the beef industry, the reality is that she is helping impact youth who, whether they decide to continue their involvement in the beef industry or pick another career route, they are going to turn into educated consumers and voters for us in the future, which I think we can all agree is very, very important. Now, before we dive into Cheramie's story and hear her advice, I do want to remind you that I am doing podcast coaching. So whether you are interested in starting a podcast for your business, starting it for yourself as a hobby, or even monetizing it, I have different courses available for you as well as a workbook. So if you are interested in determining if a podcast is right for you or you're just ready to dive in, head to the link in my show notes for podcast coaching, and you can connect with me and we'll figure out what the right route is for you, whether it is podcasting or maybe you need to take another route to apply your passion. Happy to have that conversation with you. Now, with that, let's visit with Cheramie. Well, Cheramie, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I mean, I say this to a few people, but you've been on the list for a while, and I know we've been Facebook friends for a few years, and we think we've bumped into each other down the road somewhere, even though neither one of us can quite pinpoint the exact event. So I'm excited to have you on here and talk about your story, but even more importantly, what you're doing to help develop youth and promote the beef industry today.
Shay, first off, I want to say congratulations and thank you for what you're doing. I enjoy just kind of following along your journey, and I think telling our story is obviously really important, and providing information streams in a real practical way is something I think you've done a good job on, and I appreciate that. From a cow-calf producer standpoint, you kind of found your niche, and I think that's cool. So congratulations on doing that, and I appreciate that. As for my journey, I've had a cool ride, the best way to describe it. And I can just tell you briefly, grew up in South Louisiana, showed cattle under 4-H there. Louisiana has a really strong 4-H program, but I also had a couple of families that showed Angus cattle, and had the opportunity to get to travel with them to some junior nationals. My parents were incredibly supportive, and I'm like fourth or fifth generation in agriculture. Our family on both sides had sugarcane, and then on my mom's side had a dairy, and have had beef cattle in small ways. So went from there to Clarendon Junior College, then to Texas A&M, found my way into a congressional internship in Washington, D.C. At that point, I didn't even know the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. I actually did the internship on a dare, so it's kind of a fun story. But that led to a job working for a U.S. congressman for a couple of years as an ag LA, and I was in and out of the district in Central Texas. But that really opened my eyes, number one, for a passion for legislation, and two, just kind of how our government is run and what happens in Washington, D.C. So that was a big takeaway for me. Spent some time in state legislation, state agency doing some water work. Ended up at Camp Cooley Ranch, place where in Central Texas we sold about 1,000 bulls a year. And then went to Silver Spur. Silver Spurs in Wyoming and Colorado, New Mexico, Nebraska. Was involved in several facets of that organization. Everything from their all-natural audits and working with all natural cattle, all the way through the genetic component and AI programs for a couple thousand heifers every year. So then ended up back here in Texas. And if you think of Texas or Houston as a clock, and where I'm at now at Tomball, Texas, would be at 12 o'clock. If Houston was a clock, we sit at the top of the clock. And I bring Houston up because it's important to this story and the journey. Along the way, I've had some really neat opportunities to get to show cattle, lead a lot of national champions while I was at Silver Spur, and then help a lot of people along the way. But when I came back to Texas, all of a sudden I was placed in the middle of a metropolitan area, and it was a huge awakening. So Texas has the major stock shows every year: Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, etc. And then you break it down and you start figuring out and learning that there's ag chapters, like within maybe 100 miles of me, there's probably a couple hundred FFA chapters, not to mention 4-H in addition to. So there's a huge audience of potential consumers. And that's kind of where this next journey has started, where the next piece comes in.
That is a very cool ride, as you said in your own words. And before we kind of dive into what you're doing now, I want to take a step back to that experience you had in DC. Can you dive more into how that opened your eyes and the importance of sharing our story as beef producers?
Sure. So I'm going to date myself here and say that I was there during the crafting of the 1995 Farm Bill and NAFTA, things like that, and that was for my internship. And then the 95 Farm Bill would have been when I was working for Congressman Edwards. But what you learn when you're in DC is that DC is run by a bunch of 20-somethings. And yes, you have congressmen and senators, but the true feet on the ground, legs making things happen, are a much younger generation who don't have true life working experience in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to agriculture. And so you begin to have conversations and you find out that they don't know the difference of a beef cow and a dairy cow, or how electric vehicles might affect a beef producer that lives in North Dakota, say. So I'm putting that in today's terms. We were dealing with a lot different challenges at that time when I was there. What I learned while I was in DC is that we have to tell that story about what we are about in agriculture and how we provide food for citizens of the US. And that is, I think, the core of what I came away from with DC was that was one thing. The other thing is I came away when you would have different industry organizations come in and talk to maybe it was Congressman Stenholm's staff or Congressman Edwards' staff, and you had multiple different organizations from the beef industry come in. And then you'd have staffers come to you because they knew you had a beef background and say, well, which one of these groups should we really believe? You know, is it this group or is it that group on the national level that's right? And so that really helped me to understand how important unification is in our industry, that we should be about the beef industry, and the inward fighting that we have sometimes is really detrimental instead of positive. And so that's another thing that I feel really strongly about, is that when we go to DC, we should be about the beef industry and agriculture as a whole, because those folks don't know the differences. And that's become something that I'm pretty passionate about, is encouraging people to become involved in industry organizations and work for unification.
Wow, I think we could go down that rabbit hole if we wanted to, but that's not why I brought you on today. Maybe that'll have to be like a part 2 or 3. Sure. We'll see where the conversation goes. But so that was really one part of your story where, when we talked previously, you said that shaped a lot of your viewpoints today, or was very impactful on your life. Maybe that's a better way to put it. But then you also mentioned that you had a shift in mindset when you went from working on larger operations, going back to your own cow-calf operation. And can you talk a little bit about that mindset change and experience?
Sure. So two things there. I could have just really easily went to my day job, as I call it. I work for Westway Feed Products as the national marketing manager, and we provide liquid feed, value-added liquid feed to beef, dairy, and feed mills. And I could have just simply went to work every day, let that be my passion, but I just couldn't let go or chose not to let go of the cow side of things. I get to judge a few cow shows, and I didn't want to be somebody that judged cattle shows and was telling people what was right and wrong about cattle and didn't actually lead, feed, breed, calve, take care of cattle. So I decided to continue on with raising cattle, even though I live basically, really close to the Houston Metroplex. And so the difference is like when we were at the Bell Ranch in New Mexico for Silver Spur, a pasture there, I can remember there was one pasture that was 18,000 acres. My pastures here at Tomball are maybe 5 acres, 10 acres, 5 to 10 probably is. And so it brings a different perspective of how you manage your ground, how you manage your soil, your grass, etc. But you also, you don't order mineral by the truckload like we did at Silver Spur, Camp Cooley. You order mineral or you just go get mineral by the bag. So your economies of size change, your buying power changes, as simple as your vet relationship changes. What it did is the reality is in the beef industry today, we have a much greater percentage of producers who have 1 to 50 cows than those that have over 5,000 cows. And it brought me to the reality of I'm in a sector of the beef industry now that's probably more realistic to the majority of beef producers. And I face their challenges where I wasn't facing the same challenges when I was in corporate ranching. And it has made me, I think I'm a better producer because of it, because I have to find ways to add value. I have to find ways to watch cost. I have to find a different customer base. For example, I love big contemporary groups. There's nothing better to create better cattle than to have large contemporary groups. But where I'm at, I can't do that because my customer base on selling heifer calves, the first thing we do is we sell heifer calves at weaning to kids for show heifers. It kills me to break a contemporary group like that because I know what it is when you have big data or large data sets. So those are just some of the things that it's been a mindset, a lot of paradigm shifts to go. But the biggest thing is the opportunity to touch consumers is when you begin to live in this area. You pull into the gas station, you have a trailer load of cows and there's little kids there that, I want to touch the cow. Or you have conversations with consumers or you overhear conversations maybe in your workplace or just in the community, you begin to understand that there's a constituency that has no idea how their food gets to the table. And it begins, that has become my passion of just, it's a God-given thing of why I ended up in humid South Central Texas again, after I swore I wasn't going to live where it was humid ever again. But there's a reason. And I think that's the reason, it is to help tell that story in a different way to future consumers and today's consumers.
Do you have cool season pastures that you wish you could graze in the summer? Or maybe you graze corn stalks but wish that ground could provide a little extra nutrition. Or perhaps you watch your fallow wheat acres bake in the sun all summer, providing no additional income. For all these situations and more, at Greencover, they've got the seed and expertise to get you covered. They listen to your needs to design a custom seed mix that works for your unique situation. They grow over 60% of their inventory through contract producers, and they deliver it right to your door, no matter where you are at in the country. With over 120 species in stock, from sorghum sedans, millets, and cowpeas to oats, rye, clovers, and peas, they have everything you need to keep your ground covered and feed your livestock. Reach out to their expert sales team to get a quote today or visit their website at greencover.com. Okay, Cheramie, so I really appreciate all that background and you talking about those mindset shifts and paradigm shifts that you had to make when you shifted from your DC experience back to ranching and then working from big ranches to being on your smaller ranch. But I really think that ties into what you're doing today in the next part of our conversation. So tell me about how you got started with working with youth and what you're
Okay.
doing today.
So it starts probably back when I was in 4-H growing up. I had a lot of people that taught me and encouraged me to share as I learned. So I think it goes back to early days in South Louisiana. But then along the way, at Silver Spur and at Camp Cooley, we had some intern programs. Had a lot of great young people that would come and spend the summer with us or help us breed heifers, and that really started a passion for teaching young people in a practical, hands-on way. And I think that opened the door for me to understand that I can present things in a pretty simple, fun way that kids can retain it. And so that probably encouraged me, I guess, to grow that. And then as I looked around, when I came back to Texas and looked around, I saw the need for foundation building with kids. Sullivan Show Supply does a great job with their clinics and what they do in terms of teaching kids about hair and fitting, touch on showmanship, etc. But I wanted to go further back than that. I wanted to go further into the foundation of setting kids up to be successful. But then I got to thinking about how can I incorporate the beef industry with that? And what we came up with just over time is that I wanted young people to understand if they show cattle, they're part of the beef industry. They're not just showing a heifer or a steer, they're part of either they're going to be a consumer down the road, a decision maker in their household, or perhaps they're going to go back into agriculture as a beef producer. But there's a whole bunch more of them that won't be beef producers. And I wanted to make sure that we were instilling in them some of the positives that we do in the beef industry. And that's what led to what we call the Not Your Ordinary Cattle Clinics.
So share a little bit more about what you're doing at these clinics, how you're getting that message across and equipping these kids.
We use showmanship as the vehicle to get kids there. That's the just bottom line, is that they come to these clinics with the idea, how are they going to learn more about showmanship? And we talk about cattle management too. We begin to integrate, if you do some things at home correctly, then it sets you up to be more successful in the show ring. But along with that is, hey, for you to be successful, your heifer needs to, or steer or bull needs to be vaccinated correctly. That means you need to handle your vaccines correctly. Did you know that that's important to consumers, that how you vaccinate your cattle and then how you handle your cattle? So we go back and while they come to the clinics to attend for showmanship improvement, they leave after we've done several sessions with the understanding that they're part of the beef industry, they're long-term part of the beef industry, and that we do things in the beef industry to set livestock up to be the best and safest consumer product that's possible. So when that kid, say from Central Texas or South Texas, I'll use an example. I was at an ag school or a high school a couple weekends ago, and they have kids that live in neighborhoods that come to the school farm, feed their cattle twice a day. And those kids will probably never, ever ranch or raise cattle in volume, but they have show cattle. And to them, it's just about going to a stock show. They didn't necessarily tie it together with the whole beef and meat part. So I try to connect that. And then we do a little bit about structure and on cattle structure of the why, so that they understand when they're showing cattle why they do some things. But that structure piece ties into, and I can tie genetics into it too, ties into sustainability. If you raise the right cattle, then those cattle are going to be more successful, more longevity for a rancher. That's what sustainability is about, is having the right cattle in the right place for your generations to come. So and we are flexible in those, at those clinics. If there's a group of kids that maybe we have a set of kids that are really, that have shown quite a bit, then maybe we go down one trail. If we have a bunch of 9, 10, 11-year-olds, maybe we go down a different trail. So it's flexible. We're going to do one in Oregon, in Central Oregon in July. And that one is very geared to basic foundational kind of pieces, setting the foundation for those young people to win in showmanship. But we're going to talk about the beef industry too, and how they can be a part of the beef industry.
So how do you determine location for these clinics?
It started out, the very first one we had was in College Station, Texas, at Texas A&M, because it was just local to me. And then after that, it's been word of mouth. Folks ask, and I really, it's been a couple years since I ran an ad about them. I hadn't even put anything on Facebook here lately about it. Just because of time and running cows, I'm limited as to how many of these we can do. But it's just word of mouth. Folks hear about it, see pictures, and then they maybe talk to kids. And once I kid about my kids. I personally don't have any children, but I have a lot of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those kids talk about the clinics too, and encourage others to attend. And that to me is part of the success.
What is the most rewarding part for you about hosting these clinics?
Seeing kids, maybe not even the kids who win, that makes you feel good, but kids who make improvements, or kids that'll come find you at a show, or just reach out to you and say, hey, I did this, or I spoke to my 4-H club, or I talked to my 8th grade class about why we vaccinate cattle, or things like that. Hearing back from the kids that they took what they learned and applied it and reached out, that's the most rewarding piece to me, is when it reaches, when you hit the understanding with those kids that it's more than just showing cattle, that they're part of the beef industry. That's when it's really fun.
So what advice do you have for others who are passionate about teaching kids in the beef industry?
Well, I'll take it at an adult level first, and then I'll move to a young person level. I'd say as adults, we in the industry have to recognize that we can't keep talking inward. We can't just keep talking to our industry. We have to do more where we talk to consumers and potential consumers on the East Coast, the West Coast, in metropolitan areas, because ultimately that's where the voting constituency is. And that's, if we don't win votes, agriculture isn't here in 5, 10, 15 years down the road as we know it today. So that's really, really important. And then the next step is that we have to encourage young people to not be afraid to have conversations with their peers. Talk about, that kid that says he wants to be vegan or doesn't believe in showing cattle or raising cattle. Number one, you need to be factual. Number two, you can't be combative. And you need to understand their perspective and be respectful. But we have to have those conversations on both the adult and the young person level. And I encourage people, what I tell them at our clinics is learn 5 facts. Just, you don't have to know everything. Maybe you want to talk about upcycling, how cows convert grass to protein, or maybe you want to talk about how important iron and zinc is in nutrition of development for young people. Whatever your stream of what you feel comfortable, pick 5 or so things and learn those facts really solidly, and able and willing to talk about it. When I'm in an airport, if I might have a conversation with somebody about, hey, that looks like a really good vegan burger. You ever thought about you're not getting enough iron from that? Something like that. You have to be willing to have those conversations. And it's not always easy, but we have to win the constituents, or maintain and win the constituents across the country. It's about voting, to what it comes down to.
It is. I appreciate that perspective. I know in my own advocacy is something that I have to remind myself, and it's something that I was told all through junior high and elementary, junior high, high school how important advocacy is, and I never felt comfortable having those conversations. And really, when I started getting more comfortable, it's when I understood that it's about listening and
Right.
sharing the facts and sharing your story. It's not about changing their mind. Yes, wouldn't it be great if we could? But if they can share their side of the story, that's not going to change my mind. I'm not going to quit eating beef.
Right.
So,
But just being willing to have that conversation is important. When I travel, I make sure that I wear either one of my Lazy 3 shirts that say building better beef, or a Westway feed product shirt. And you have conversations. People will say, what is that? Or something like that. And it's not about necessarily, like you said, convincing somebody, but if you could just plant the seed, and maybe there's a fact that you can provide that makes them go, huh, I wonder about that. Maybe I'll go look it up. I think that's
mhm.
important.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
don't be afraid to have conversations outside our industry. We have to stop only talking inwardly.
Absolutely. It's not comfortable, but
No,
it's
not at
important.
all. Right, right. It's fun to travel, and sometimes I get to travel and you have somebody in a cowboy hat, and there's somebody that is not very comfortable having those conversations. And I'll lead them into a conversation with the person sitting next to them in the airport or something like that.
Mhm.
And it gets fun. You can have fun with it.
Absolutely. Jeremy, is there anything else you want to add to this conversation or anything else we didn't talk about today?
Well, we probably could talk about a lot.
I know.
I think number one, I've had a lot of mentors, and I tell young people, find your mentors. And I always kidded about having a quote board of directors, and people like Minnie Lou Bradley, James and Mary Lou Henderson, my mom, other folks, John Maurer, were really influential for me. And so I tell young people, find your board of directors and ask those people, am I on a good track? Am I doing okay? What should I do different? I think that's important for young people. Don't be afraid to try. I have a lot of conversations with young people before they're headed off to college, and you don't have to know what you're going to do your freshman year of college, those kind of things. So I think being open-minded is really important to all of us, whether it be in the beef industry or choosing a career, those kind of things. I think just having our young people know that we're going to have to work harder to maintain the future than our previous generations did is important. And so that's why I have a lot of conversations with kids entering college. They're going to have to try 10 times harder to maintain our lifestyle as what their parents or grandparents did. So I think that's important.
Absolutely. And I was just at our North Dakota Cattle Women's Conference this weekend, and one of the quotes shared by a speaker there was, and it wasn't her quote, it was a quote she was sharing, and I don't remember who said it, but it was, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it,
Right.
doesn't it just lie and rot? And I
Right.
think, when she talked about how important it is to share our message, and I think that just really resonates, especially with how fast things spread on social media, news outlets, and we're in such a world where hooks and headlines sell, even
Right.
if they're misleading.
Right.
So,
That is, and so don't let social media be the sole source of their education. Be willing to have those conversations, whether you're an adult, you're a high school student, you're in fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade. I think you have to be willing to have those conversations.
well, and be the friend. And if they have questions about, like, if people have questions about the methane or environmental side, I'm maybe not the best person to talk about that, but I have friends who can, and I can share them
I'll
in that
find
direction.
that, and be willing to open your doors. Is we you have to let people come in and see. My cows probably are on a better nutrition program than I am, if you want to know the truth. Or invite those neighbors who aren't, or people who don't necessarily make their living in agriculture. Invite them to come see what we do, so they understand the conservation, the stewardship, all the positives that we do. Because if you don't have them on locale, they're not going to know all the positives that we do. So I think that's important too, is be willing to open your doors.
Absolutely. Well, Cheramie, I appreciate the conversation today and you being a guest on the show and sharing your story and everything that you're doing for the youth in our country.
Well, you're welcome, and keep doing what you're doing. I think you're doing a great job.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you, Cheramie, for having this conversation with me. Now, if you listen to this episode, I'm really curious what your thoughts are. As a reminder, I can't read your mind through our phones. So please send me a message, whether that's through my website or on social media, and let me know what you thought about the episode. If you have other guest ideas or topic suggestions, I'd love to hear that. I'd love to connect. I really just appreciate understanding who's out there listening. So with that, be sure to let me know your thoughts today. And if you're on Spotify, you can even put a comment there below the episode. But happy ranching, folks.